My name is Judy Schwartz, and I'm a journalist, and I live in Bennington, Vermont, which right now in high summer is quite beautiful. It's a nice, cool morning, which will become a nice sunny day. Trust me, it's not always like this, but when it is, we we smile about it. And yeah, so lately I've been exploring nature inspired solutions to our many global crises.
Great. So, speaking of those solutions, yeah, I found out about you and I picked up a copy of your book, latest book, of course, The Reindeer Chronicles. And so, for those out there who haven't heard of it, could you tell us what is the book about? And also, what was your inspiration for writing it?
Sure. Okay, so the title is The Reindeer Chronicles and Other Inspiring Stories of Working with Nature to Heal the Earth. And it's kind of a global tour of earth repair with stops in China, the Middle East, and Spain, and a few interesting places in the US, including Hawaii, New Mexico, and Eastern Washington State, and a little bit about my backyard too here. Yeah, so the inspiration was manyfold, okay? One was sheer excitement and enthusiasm about all the wonderful ecological restoration projects that I was hearing about, but no one else was no one that I just would bump into in my regular circles, people who were concerned about the environment had no idea. So I felt it really important to bring these stories to the fore for many reasons. One, because just to show what's possible. How can we aspire to solutions that we don't even know exist? Also, because in sharing these stories, we're kind of building a bank of knowledge of how to restore ecosystems. So, what works in Saudi Arabia may not be immediately applied to Montana in the US, but actually there are some really basic understandings of how watersheds and work and how animals impact the landscape and all of these things. So another reason is that kind of as a journalist, I'm always looking to what isn't out there. And something really important that I saw was that in talking about climate, we have been neglecting the capacity of or the role of functioning ecosystems in climate regulation. And I feel that is so important because we know, and I show examples through the book, that even the most degraded landscapes can be restored. And so we know we can restore ecosystems to function, which means kind of rebooting their climate regulation capacity. So we have within us the capacity to help manage climate to some extent. I'm not saying the greenhouse gas piece is not a large piece of it, but there is so much that we can do while we are working to bring down the concentration of CO2.
And yeah, there were so many amazing examples in your book. I think the one that stuck out to me most was actually the first story, right, where you met John D. Liu,
Mhm.
who had worked in China. Could you tell me a bit more about that story?
Yeah. So there's a filmmaker that I've had the chance to get to know named John D. Liu. And his story was that he was okay. So in his youth, he was kind of taught himself how to use a camera. And then he went to China, kind of not out of his own sense of adventure, because he was basically told, if you don't go, you will never have a chance to meet your grandmother. So he went and found himself at this incredible juncture of Chinese history where kind of old traditions were giving way to modernization, just like this huge transformation. So he picked up his camera and he became a cameraman for a major network and saw like all these kind of global transformations, the fall of the Soviet Union, Tiananmen Square, all sorts of geopolitical big stories. But what really changed his life was he kind of fell into documenting uh, this project, which was the Los Plateau Watershed Rehabilitation Project. And the story there is that where this was the breadbasket of China, where agriculture was born in that part of the world around the same time as in the Fertile Crescent. And over millions of years, not millions, no, after thousands of years, the land had degraded, partly because the nature of that soil is very high mineral, very kind of rich nutrient wise, but very friable. So when you start to, when you get, you're not taking care of the soil, then it flows into the Yellow River, silting it up. It blows away, it erodes, and you lose the topsoil when you get heavy rain. So there it was. It was degrading, and the silting up of the Yellow River was becoming a huge problem. So the Chinese government, as a kind of top-down scenario, said, okay, we are going to restore it. And so they got together all sorts of scientists and economists and hydrologists and biologists and all these people, all these experts, and they made a plan. And they got funding from the World Bank, and they started to apply very simple ecological restoration principles to this landscape. And in the course of about 15 years, an area of land the size of Belgium was returned to ecological function. And, I say that John Liu fell into this because in the beginning, like, you don't really think that anything can happen. So he just happened to have taken before photographs and film before the project, when no one really had that high hopes for it. But then you could see the transformation. So it's so fortunate that we have this record. Otherwise, we would just be dealing with hearsay, basically, and some scientific papers.
Uh, and these projects are going on obviously all over the world, right? Ecosystem restoration. And
Oh,
yet, why is it that we don't hear about these?
well, one thing is that I am really glad that we are starting to hear them more and more. People in the realm of permaculture, which is a way of engaging kind of more holistically with nature, and it begins on it can be on any scale, but often maybe begins with a small project. People that teach permaculture are absolutely so busier than they've ever been because people want to know how to bring pollinators to their backyard. They want to know how to grow their own food. They want to know how to do that without using chemicals and to turn their lawn into something beautiful that will attract birds. So people all over are doing that. But why don't we hear about it? It's a really interesting question. And I think this goes to the root of our climate challenge. And one thing that I often say is that the way that we talk about our challenges often interferes with our ability to do anything about them. And what I see having happened is a kind of collective starving of our own imaginations. So we've kind of narrowed our understanding of climate to the levels of this one molecule, which, when you think about it, climate is all around us. Climate nature is modulating and regulating climate all the time, every time the breeze blows. And when I say the breeze blows, that's carrying moisture, and the movement of moisture through the atmosphere is the largest conveyor of energy. And the way that that is driven is by plants. So in reading the IPCC, which came out last week, I'm not sure when this is going to post, but this is mid-August right now. It was scary and very alarming, but I also, as I said, like to look at what is missing. And I didn't see vegetation in there. I didn't see water as a conveyor of energy. Whereas that opens up so many possibilities. When we can understand the causes of climate change in a more complex way than merely the rising concentrations of CO2 in the atmosphere, then we have kind of set out many different avenues to address it, many different possible solutions, many different ways to empower all of us, because I so believe that we can all be empowered, and we're all called to do different things. I mean, I would love to say that, I'm going to trek out there and I'm going to restore 50 hectares and bring in, animals and herd them. I've done a little bit of that, and I know what I'm good at and what I'm not good at, but I'm really glad and grateful for the people that can do that. So we're all called to do different things. And the way that we've framed it, it concerns me that well, on one hand, it disempowers us. On the other hand, it neglects a huge part of the global population. Whereas if we look at, because it's all people sitting at their desks in the developed world, we have to pressure our governments. Yes, we have to um, you know um, challenge the oil companies. Yes, we do. But there are people all over the world, like the people in China, who were planting trees, building terraces, changing the way that they manage their livestock, that can be invited into the process, as opposed to disenfranchised, as many of these people are disenfranchised in other ways.
Yeah, and the narratives that we believe has such a massive impact on how we respond, right, to these crises. And so what worries me now is, like you said, this disempowerment, and also the way this allows these billionaires to step in with their tech solutions and their
Exactly.
geoengineering and these.
And
Yeah.
fake meat, which concerns me hugely.
Oh yeah, tell me
Someone who,
more about that, about your concerns.
yeah, oh, it concerns me a lot. And again, I feel that it's a manifestation of people's sense of disempowerment, that many people are told the best thing that you can do for the planet is to stop eating meat. Okay? Now, absolutely, I think there's a big case to be made that people in the developing world, and increasingly, or the developed world and increasingly in the semi-developed world, are eating too much meat that is being raised in a very ecologically harmful way. However, this is very context dependent. I know I've reported in Zimbabwe where the best use of the land is for rangeland to raise cattle. And this is deep into people's cultures. And so, who are we again in the developed world that have, all sorts of choices at the grocery store to tell people what they should and shouldn't do? Also, I think it's really important. Anyway, it's a manifestation of our disconnection from the land, that we want to think that food can be clean. We want to think that there's no death involved. But to grow a lot of soy or pea protein or whatever it is, corn, and not to mention palm oil for for our plant-based synthesized products, that means clearing all sorts of land, a lot of land, which means destroying habitat for many living things. Whereas I've seen ranch lands where people are managing their livestock in a way that is building biodiversity, drawing down carbon, enhancing watersheds. So we kind of need to know what we're talking about, and then really, I just have to say that these synthesized, fake alternative proteins, many of these have like kind of protein combos, that are synthesized that the human body has never encountered before. We don't know what the implications to human health will be. And that's really doing a big experiment on us. And and it's being advertised to appeal to young people, and that really, really alarms me because I know that when the body encounters molecules that it doesn't recognize, the response is inflammation. And we know that inflammation underlies a lot of health problems. So that really concerns me. Plus, it's all that stuff, all the fodder for those fake meat um, products are grown in according to industrial agriculture with use of pesticides and herbicides, GMOs that are designed to withstand those that we know have a harmful effect on humans. Okay, there. I think I
Yeah.
covered what I
No,
wanted to say at least.
absolutely. Yeah, and I think it also disempowers people more, right? Because it tells you, oh, you don't know how, or you can't grow your own food. We got this. Big corporations will feed you. And that's another direction that I
Yes,
find very concerning.
very much so.
Yeah.
Whereas, like certainly a place like the United States, I live in a rural area. When I see these large expanses of land, and that's where sheep could be, and goats, and all of that. And I did do a little experiment of having sheep on our property, which was quite beautiful and really did kind of change the way I understand how land works.
So what happened with your sheep experiment?
Well, I adored the sheep. They made me smile a lot. It um it was only, as we said, a sheep over. The plan was just for us to have them for the summer. But just I saw how possible it was. I saw that we could do without our lawnmower. I don't mean easily. It would be a commitment and all of that. But just how what I just see as static land was full of that fed these beautiful beings, and just how we all as people sing along with nature. Just what a wonderful thing it was to be sharing this space with other beings.
So I saw that your previous two books, one was called Cows Save the Planet and Other Improbable Ways of Restoring Soil to Heal the Earth. I like your long titles there. So I guess what was the main thing that you learned about soil health, and possibly, what are the main misunderstandings that you think people have around livestock?
Yeah, so it was okay. So this is a book about soil, and but I gave it that title because at that time, don't forget, we're talking 10 years ago when I started. I think the book definitely holds up, but at that point, nobody wanted a book about soil except for my publisher. Now that's different. People have awakened to soil, but I think the thing is that just what we often miss, the whole choreography of nature. So that animals have an impact on the land, and that impact can be negative or positive depending on how those animals are managed, and also understanding the different kinds of landscapes. So I live in a a very wet environment, that there's rain, there's moisture in the soil all throughout the year, whereas much of the world's land is what we call brittle, which means that there's a dry season and a rainy season. And I learned the importance of animals on the landscape managed appropriately to keep those landscapes alive, because nature had a challenge, which was how to maintain moisture in the soil. In other words, to keep life going from the end of one rainy season and the beginning of the next. And that answer that nature came up with was through the behavior and digestive systems of ruminant animals. So I saw how necessary animals are in the landscape, and I keep learning that again and again. I'm learning about how in times when, in areas where that are prone to fire, the role of animals in keeping down the fire fuel. So we evolved with animals, our landscapes evolved with animals, and just the importance of their being in the picture. They're not just standing there, like looking wild or looking bovine or whatever, but they're also not taking from the environment. They're taking and giving and transforming.
Mm. And possibly when people hear that meat is bad for the planet, they therefore imagine we have to somehow live in a world without cows or sheep, or I don't know what it is that people think and why it's so, yeah, such big news for them. I mean, I grew up around sheep in North Wales and cows, and it's actually quite strange for me now living in a place where I don't see these animals much at all. It's quite sad, really. But so I'm sure with your work, you come up against a lot of misconceptions that people have about the environment and water and soil, and so yeah, what is one thing that you would really love for people to know if they're watching right now?
Um, I guess, I guess that life is a lot, doesn't need to be so lonely, that there's abundance out there that nourishes us and we can help create abundance. And that when we approach our concerns from a standpoint of fear, sometimes, we get into this scarcity mindset. But when we start to look at through abundance, we can see what's possible. And in terms, I guess another thing you said, well, one thing, um, just that to ask good questions and to honor our own curiosity and imagination. And one question that I think is important that we don't ask enough about climate is, how does the earth manage heat? Because once we ask that question, that opens up lots of really interesting answers and lots of opportunities for agency.
So now, yeah, considering that I might release this a little bit after the IPCC report is not such big news, but still not too far into the future, I imagine a lot of people read, well, maybe not read the whole thing. They hear the news version of it, right? And they feel a lot of despair and hopelessness and maybe disempowerment. So, what would you say to these people?
I would invite people in. I would pay attention to the fact that this is the UN decade on ecosystem restoration, and to broaden their understanding of how climate interacts with biodiversity and with water, and to explore and to trust that nature has its own logic, and we can ally with that logic in all kinds of beautiful and ultimately empowering way. and that we need you. So there's another book that I'll mention. It's because people all around the world, it's published in the US. I don't know what kind of global, awareness there is about it. It's called All We Can Save: Truth, Courage, and Solutions for the Climate Crisis. And I do have an essay in there about water
Mhm.
and water and climate, how the water cycle, working with the water cycle, helps us address our climate challenges. And it's a book of writing on climate, all by women. And the editors have created an All We Can Save project. They talk about how climate change is a crisis of leadership. So I would invite people to consider how they can lead, because there's not just one way to lead, and how they can get involved. And also, I mentioned loneliness in terms of, humans aren't alone on this earth, and there's all this rich nature to engage with, but also you don't need to deal with your own fears about climate, which of course we all have, or biodiversity loss, or whatever strikes you at any given moment. You needn't be alone in that there are such groups as the All We Can Save circles is one way. There are all kinds of local groups that are working on individual watersheds or animal communities, such as beavers in the Western United States, which can help to rebuild our wetlands. And also, as I mentioned, the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, because there are invitations on the website. I forget what the website is, Decade on, anyway, it'd be easily found, but there are ways to participate. And in all ways, whether it's you know videos, graphics, art, music, activism, growing food, building local communities, etc.
Thank you. And do you have any other books in the pipeline?
Not in the pipeline,
Mhm.
but what I've found, what often happens to me is that it's for a long time I'm not doing another book. I'm not doing another book. And then I come to a moment when I realize that I had been reporting another book without even being aware of it.
Mm, yeah, so we'll see what comes next then.